ClimateAction.tech is a community of tech professionals with the goal to inspire and empower each other to take climate action. And we run this call to share ideas and facilitate conversation within our community for both Eastern and Western friendly time zones. Today's speaker is Roelof, and he will talk about big tech and big oil.
Take it away, Roelof.
Great. So, yes, let me see if this all works. So yeah, I'll try to keep this relatively short, even though it's a lot of slides. But I just wanted to give a kind of general overview of some of the stuff that's going on with big tech and big oil. Yeah, so I'll skip more of the intro about myself. We can talk about that later. But the only thing to kind of contextualize maybe what I'm saying, I come more from the direct action type scope of things, but then over time have also become older and have kind of joined startups and have become a little bit less active in that field, but still quite involved in kind of environmental topics that are still very close to my heart, and have always worked as an AI engineer, AI data scientist as well. So this is kind of a topic that is quite close to my heart. And then a lot of this presentation actually comes from the amazing Greenpeace report, Oil in the Cloud. I can highly recommend everybody to read, and some other resources I also have at the end. So a lot of the images are not mine, but we're today at a critical juncture for cloud and AI technologies. And I would like to kind of tell a little bit more like why this particular topic is so urgent right now. And it has to do with the kind of origin of oil production, where all the kind of exclamation marks, you can see kind of when it was predicted that oil would kind of stop. Like there was a kind of height of oil production, and then at the end of the kind of exclamation mark, that's kind of where the oil would not be able to be drilled out from the earth anymore. But what actually happened was that every single time new innovations and new kind of technologies pushed kind of things ahead, that still millions of barrels could be pumped out of the ground. And time and again, these kind of new innovations drove the amount of oil that was being produced up exponentially. And up until quite recently, it was actually going down. It was kind of like a big challenge for gas and oil companies. They were kind of thinking, okay, should we kind of have to go towards renewables, which would have been great for everyone. But then the fracking boom started, and things started changing a little bit, which is kind of the most environmental polluting, most horrific way of, and the most stupid way of getting oil, which is just blowing shit up. But it's cheap, so that's kind of what is heavily happening in the States. And so this is basically what is currently where we are. So there's a lot of current reserves of oil and gas on the ground, which if we would get all of that out of the ground, that will already get us past the 2 or even 3 degrees warming. And then added to that, there is a lot of kind of investments being made in kind of better extraction methods, and also trying to find even more new oil fields. And all of that is aided heavily by AI specifically. That's the kind of new technology that makes a lot of these things possible. And mainly for these 3 things. So upstream, we have finding and extracting oil and gas. So a lot of AI technology is used, specifically the field I work in, which is remote sensing, Earth observation. So with the help of satellite imagery or cameras, kind of looking into the Earth. Midstream, which is the kind of the transporting and sorting things out, and downstream is more about refining and PR and things like this. But this is how these things then look like. So you have on the finding and extracting oil and gas, there's all kind of 3D modeling being used to interpret seismic data, which is essentially causing little earthquakes or kind of looking into the ground and trying to see where different layers are and if there's oil to be found. And especially the combination of remote sensing data and satellite data together with AI technologies has kind of revolutionized this field in the past few years, and will continue to do so, mainly by the same kind of 3 companies I'm talking about, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon especially. Then on the other hand, we have more predictive maintenance. So there's a lot of leaks of oil pipes, gas, which causes a lot of methane and other kind of polluting things, but also a lot of costs for these companies. So better automated Pipeline monitoring helps kind of gas and oil companies to work more efficiently, and not only work more efficiently, but also work in areas where otherwise they wouldn't be able to drill. And then, of course, there's the kind of standard big data approach, which means you can do these things much more efficiently. And then finally, downstream, there's a lot of new technologies used for more refining, and especially for kind of the new shell, SHELL gas, and refining. A lot of new technologies are being used that that these kind of things can even be useful. And also kind of new ways of using petrochemicals for new kind of materials. So then what is predicted by Bloomberg is that oil companies are moving more and more to the cloud, where the main gains are to be made in efficiency and computing. And from this year, spending $2.5 billion, it's predicted that they will start spending around $15.7 billion. So this is why large tech companies are so so combative in trying to win these gas and oil contracts, because it's really about billions and billions of dollars that these companies are willing to spend on kind of cloud infrastructure. Google, the first one, has about 8% of the gas and oil market share, smallest one. The good stuff, Google is doing actually pretty well on the renewable energy front. They have been kind of carbon neutral since 2017-18, if you count kind of buying power through power purchase agreements as kind of carbon neutral. And also if you count purchasing carbon offsets as carbon neutral, then Google is relatively carbon neutral. I would question that, but like that's for another topic. Still, it's pretty good. There's some other great initiatives as well around Environment Insight Explorer, Google Earth Engine, which makes it easy to do Earth observation for all kind of climate purposes. So on this front, Google is doing really, really well. And they seem to be taking the kind of, on the PR side, things really seriously about a sustainable future, being even very clear about the need for radically addressing climate change, and also really needing the need to reduce or even eliminate the dependence on fossil fuels. So this was 2019. Still, Google is having a lot of gas and oil contracts. These are some of them. I'll skip kind of the details of this, but this is from the Greenpeace report, where you can go more into detail on this. But yeah, let it just say that like these are large, many $million contracts, and these are contracts that are still active. Even if Google, as you can see here, in 2018, Google started a new specialized oil, gas, and energy division, headed by a British petroleum veteran, which then moved next year to Microsoft. Maybe because of that he left, or maybe because he left, it was maybe that cloud said, okay, we're going away from gas and oil. It's only about 1% of Google's revenue, so it's not that it hurts them that much. And in 2020, just after the Greenpeace report, Google also said they will not develop custom AI solutions anymore. But this means there's still a lot of like ongoing existing contracts for exactly that work, and also for just general cloud services. So of course, the action point there would be to kind of try to take Google completely off any kind of oil and gas involvement. Microsoft has kind of 3 times as much, 18% of the gas and oil market share. They're also doing pretty good. They're trying to get renewable by 2025, so not there yet. They also want to kind of go historically by 2050, that all their historical carbon emissions are removed. And they also launched a $1 billion climate innovation fund. Pretty great stuff. Again, carbon negative means buying a lot of carbon offsets and kind of just not really having the solution in place to be carbon neutral, but just pretending you do because you buy it from somewhere else. So I would still question this, but it's still much better than not doing these things, and it's a really good step in the right direction at least. Especially because Microsoft is quite serious on the stuff of not only naming scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but also scope 3, which means it's basically an essentially way of counting everything that goes on in the supply chain as well. So pretty good stuff. Contract-wise, as you said, Microsoft's still doing a lot of work here, really investing heavily in making Azure work well for oil and gas companies. also being quite publicly about it. Google has a lot of kind of these contracts, but they're not very public about it. Microsoft is a bit more happy to share it, fueling the oil and gas industry. Amazon, last one, 33%, so even more of the market share, so the biggest one. Also stated aims of being like carbon neutral 2030, having a 2 billion climate innovation fund. And Jeff Bezos also personally saying he wants to spend 10 billion for initiatives mitigating climate change. But knowing that like the context we're talking about is like in the factor of 30 billion plus, this could be a nice tax to put on that, but it's not necessarily that this will mean that Amazon won't do business with gas and oil. Also, there is some momentum going on potentially. They did remove the Amazon for oil and gas as a redirection to now Amazon Energy. So that page doesn't exist anymore. On the other hand, they also really vocally have on their kind of position that they believe climate change is real, that it needs serious and real action. So that's at least not a discussion point for them, at least shouldn't be. But also they have the largest contracts of them all. And they also make most of the work on trying to get a lot of these contracts in. And these are some of the links if you want to read more on that. Especially great is the Greenpeace report. Big Tech Loves Big Oil is a petition that kind of a campaign that's going on, which kind of is why we're having this talk as well. And then a pretty great read is also the Oils and New Data about Microsoft, kind of a Microsoft Azure worker going to Kazakhstan, and kind of you can really read up a bit more about what is the kind of work that is going on there. And just a lot of other kind of nice, kind of all the not so nice stuff in red, and then the kind of positive stories in green, if you want to kind of have a positive reading as well. This is a comparison Greenpeace did. You see Google really doing much better, also mission-wise doing much better, although all of them still have AI for all contracts. So you would, if you would be more truthful, you would say the carbon footprint should include also all this work, if they make that possible as a scope 3 emission, or maybe scope 4. But yeah, in this case, not. Then if you are working for one of these companies, or you know people, or you want to get involved, all three have kind of an active groups of people, professionals working in these organizations already. We're quite vocal on these issues. Google has Googlers for Climate Action, which also had an open letter to Google. Microsoft has Microsoft Workers for Climate Justice and Microsoft Workers for Good, which also wrote an open letter. And then Amazon also wrote a letter to Jeff Bezos and the board of directors, which has the Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. So these are kind of all great organizations to learn more about them, what's specifically going on. And then there's, of course, the campaign spearheaded by XR, which is about spreading more awareness about big tech and big oil. There's a great website, Big Tech Loves Big Oil, where you can find more information, and it also makes it easier to create some nice memes. And this week is about sending a message to Amazon. And then it must be said that a lot of these companies have, of course, like they do amazing work on the climate change front, which can be all really, really good starting points of building alliances as well. So all these companies are quite heavily involved in the climate change workshops for big AI conferences, NeurIPS, ICML, ICLR. So these are some of the organizers also working for many of the companies, especially Microsoft and Google do a lot of work on the Earth observation front as well. This is a great paper, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, if you want to know more about what you can do with AI for good as well. And then, of course, there's Google Earth Engine, which makes it much easier to do a lot of very useful things for the climate just from your browser, more data to play with. So that's it. There's some kind of different viewpoints. That's kind of all I had to say today.
Thanks. If you want to continue the conversation and find out about the next Salon, join our Slack community and the CAT Salon Slack channel, where we'll keep you up to date.